they decide that technology is non-negotiable, which is right? Technology is non-negotiable. You need to leverage technology. So they decide that, and then they pick a tool, and then they start searching for the problem where they need to implement this tool. Which means to say, you now have a solution, and you're trying to retrofit this solution into a problem, not the other way around. But in our experience, scalable businesses are those businesses which will identify the problem first, then chalk out a process as to how do we solve this, and then look for tools to enable that process. That's the order. So essentially, it's a sequencing problem. Let's take an example. Sales team decides to use a particular CRM tool, best in class, no doubt. Your accounting is somewhere else. Inventory, operations, or logistics team is just updating Excel sheets, Google Sheets, and these three modules or functions do not talk to each other. So you have implemented best-in-class solutions across functions. But what happens at the end of the month is, if someone asks you a question, hey, what are your sales number for this month? You have three different numbers. Your sales is giving one number, your finance/accounting is giving another number, your operations/inventory says something else. How do we fix that? So then again, people throw money at it and then say, hey, I'm hiring someone to reconcile these three data sets. Now that's not the right approach. When we are implementing technology, ideally we need to have an integrated tool, right? Something that communicates with each other, and that is today's agenda, right? So we'll first look at what are the common problems, the diagnostic space, and typically where handoffs fail. What are the problems that we see during scale up? And then we'll discuss the blueprint. Then we'll move on to the tools that are available and the mistakes to avoid. So starting with the diagnostics, right? These are some of the common problems that we see in a lot of growing businesses, right? You're at a stage where you're looking to scale up, and these are the common issues. Same job, different outcomes. Ideally in an organization, X does the job, Y does the job, or Z does the job. The output must be same, right? That is when you are a robust, mature organization. But you're getting different outcomes depending upon who is doing the job. That's not a good sign. Delays, right? Inexplicable delays, right? No one's able to identify why there is a delay. Cross-team requests fall through the cracks. Essentially what happens is, again, handoffs. Sales talking to fulfillment. Now sales communicates something else, fulfillment understands it in a different way, that link is broken there. The fourth one, again, a major issue that we see where institutional knowledge is in people's heads, right? So people do it in a particular manner. Why are you doing it this way? Oh, this is how I've been doing it throughout. Now this person leaves, process breaks, right? So essentially there are not enough documented processes in the organization. Inconsistent customer experience. When customers interact with your business, they're interacting with your business, your brand. They're not interacting with, your policy document, right? So essentially the customer interaction or experience must be consistent irrespective of who's dealing with the customer. Now that is only possible if you have a robust policy in place, right? And the sixth one is a very dangerous sign for, growing businesses, especially founders. Let's take an example. Let's talk about, let's say, a wellness company, right? A wellness organization which supplies wellness products. Maybe they have certain retail partnerships, retail channels, and they're also into online marketplaces. So let's take this example. Now, everything needs founder sign-off. Now, it was okay when the volume was less. It was okay when you were a 10-member team, 20-member team. But now if the founder insists on every single procurement decision being signed off by himself or herself, every single invoice before getting processed, if it needs a founder's approval, then you have a major issue there, and that is where we typically call it an ornamental control. Now, what do you mean by an ornamental control? It doesn't have any functional value. On paper, you are saying the founder approves everything. The founder is capable of doing that when the volume is low. The founder is quite capable of doing that when your team size is small. But when the company scales up, is the founder able to sign off on hundreds of transactions every day? If he or she is signing off, are they really applying their mind? That's the real question, right? So these are what we call as ornamental controls which exist, which give you a false sense of confidence saying that, yes, I'm a very tightly controlled organization, I'm looking at everything, but are you really applying your mind before approving, right? That's ornamental control. The other signal where it is not a good sign of a very mature organization is onboarding or ramp up time. If a new hire, right, before he or she is able to perform their duties, the time taken to ramp up is longer. That means to say the processes in the organization are not very robust. If the processes are robust, it becomes easier for the new hire to adapt into the system, learn, and then be more productive. So this is another sign where your processes are not really there. So where do processes really break, right? If you look at handoffs, typically, let's say you have a 3-member sales team, you have a 3-member fulfillment team. The handoffs are easier, right? Because 3 people, they know what they're trying to do, they communicate directly with the other 3. Imagine a 30-member sales team interacting with a 30-member fulfillment team, right? Then it gets complicated. We don't know the context. The salesperson will have a different context than the fulfillment, right? Because sales has interacted with the customer, fulfillment has not. The context is not transferred correctly, so the handoffs break. And that is when essentially chaos comes into the process. And a lot of times, one of the mistakes that we've seen businesses do is they digitize chaos. Now, what do I mean by digitize chaos? Without fixing the underlying problem, you're not bringing in technology there. But technology is as good as back in the day, we would call it garbage in, garbage out. Technology is only processing it, right? So if what you're putting in into the technology is not good, your output is not good. Same thing here. By using tools that are available without fixing the broken process, essentially companies are only digitizing chaos. You were chaotic earlier, now you're again chaotic, but in a more faster way, right? So it brings chaos much more fastly, right? So let's look at what a good handoff looks like. You need to have a defined process, right? And it needs to be visible to both sides. Let's take an example of sales and fulfillment, right? Is the process defined in terms of how the sales team is supposed to pass on the information, the order information, order details to the fulfillment team? Is it defined? Is it visible to both parties in terms of where we are, what are the stages, and is it dependent on one person? If it is dependent on one person, then the person leaves, the entire process collapses, right? So what we will look at now is the essential blueprint in terms of people, process, and technology. People is essentially who's doing the work. Now process is where we're going to spend some time in terms of, essentially process is when you have people doing the work, do you have a drafted, well-documented process which is followed consistently while doing that work, right? So how is that work getting done? So who does the work? How is that work getting done? And technology is the connective layer. So technology enables people to do the work faster, not the other way around. What happens is, common mistake is technology comes here. No. Who does the work? How do they do it? Fix that. Then technology enables you to do it much faster, right? So some of the tools that we typically use, especially on the people side, to identify who does what is what we call as RSI matrices, right? We identify who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. Now, in your organization, for each task that is listed out as to who does it, we need to have these 4 clearly charted out so that accountability is clear, so that ownership is clear. A lot of times we have task owners, but are they responsible to do it? Are they accountable to do it? Again, this confusion, right? So typically, let's say customer refund request. One team assumes the other team is doing it. Let's say sales function assumes that the finance is responsible for it. Someone else assumes that the customer experience team is responsible for it. There's no clearly defined ownership structure there. So it is important that we define this. I'll give you a simple typical example, right? Let's talk about the event that we are in today. Let's say the AV team, right? Now, who's responsible to set it up, right? It could be the technician here, the crew here is responsible. Who is accountable for it, however? Now, accountability is someone who he reports to, essentially someone who has taken the contract for the entire event, right? That is accountable. Even if something doesn't get fixed at a crew level, you'll have to go back to someone who is accountable. That is accountability. Who is consulted? A technical expert. Maybe he wants to keep them in consulted take some suggestion in terms of how to configure a particular thing, that is consulted. And who's informed? Let's say people dealing with us, right? The teams that are dealing with the exhibitors, the speakers, they need to be informed to see, ensure that there are no last minute issues, right? So that's how you need to define the role of each person in an organization, so that when this clarity is there, people tend to become productive faster. It becomes easier to manage any changes in your workforce, etc. So this is one such tool. The next tool is what we call as DMAC. So typically this comes from Six Sigma. Now, again, DMAC is again to ensure that the processes are mature, the processes are continuously improving and evolving. So starts with define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Again, let's take an example. It could be an e-commerce company. Now, e-commerce company where it says that I'm getting a lot of returns, right? My products are getting returned back, right? Now, that's a problem. Now, how do you take it further? You measure what are the parameters, right? So you identify what are the SKUs where you see a problem, right? You define that and then you start measuring them. Then let's say you identify that bulk of my returns are from about 5 SKUs. I have tens and hundreds of SKUs, but now I have measured that most of the returns are coming from 5 SKUs. Then you go further, analyze them. What is the reason behind these 5 SKUs? SKUs is stock keeping units, the products that you're dealing with. What is the reason for these 5 SKUs to keep coming back to me, right? Then you analyze, right? You analyze, it could be, let's say, only these 5 SKUs are always nearing expiry. It is possible that items that are, nearing expiry are being sold, and hence they're coming back. That's your analysis. Then you improve by putting in a structure in place. Now, how do you improve? It could be having things like those who are familiar with retail, wellness, etc., would understand what we call as first expiry, first out, right? We have first in, first out. We have FEFO, which is whatever is going to get expired first, right? You send it out first. If you don't do that, then what are you ending up with? You're ending up with near expiry items, right? So you implement that. Now, once you implement it, how do you control it? How do I ensure that it is consistently followed and improved upon, right? That is when you assign, again, let's say KRAs. You assign KRAs to certain employees in your fulfillment team saying, hey, this is your responsibility. Here, let's say the AV team. What are the things that can go wrong? Mic could stop working, right? The laptop may be out of battery, right? All of these are failure modes. So identify every single failure mode that can affect you, have a register of it, and against each failure mode, essentially ask yourself, what is the likelihood of this failure mode happening, and what is the root cause of this? Now, again, on root cause, what we've seen over the years is it's a very wrongly used word. Everyone uses root cause very, very loosely. But what is root cause analysis? So for us to identify failure mode and to assess what is the likelihood of that happening, we need to get into root cause analysis. Typically, I would say a root cause analysis is you'll get your answer only after 4 or 5 whys. You keep asking yourself why. Let's say the floor is not clean, right? It's unclean. You ask why. Janitor has not cleaned it up. Then you ask why. Because there was not enough time in the morning shift. Then you ask again why. Why was there not enough time in the morning shift? Because maybe there was an equipment breakdown. So for a couple of hours, they were waiting for the equipment to be fixed. Now, why did the equipment need 2 hours to be fixed? Maybe because the spare parts are not available. Again, why? Why are the spare parts not available? Because I don't have a preventive maintenance checklist. So something as simple as the floor is not clean, a lot of times we go behind easy answers saying the janitor is lazy, the janitor is not available. But essentially, if you dig in further, like I said, 4 or 5 whys is what will lead to the root cause. And the root cause here being A, there was no preventive maintenance checklist available. B, there was no alternate machine that was available during which the janitor could have used. So this is what we call as root cause analysis. So when you're essentially looking at failure modes, get to the root cause and assess what is the likelihood of that failure mode happening. So So ask what could go wrong and assign a likelihood score. Against that likelihood score, coming back to our example, let's say the failure mode is mic stops working. Likelihood moderate. But what's the impact? The impact is severe. Because if the mic stops working, your seminar is disrupted. So the impact is severe. Apply it in your business, right? Let's say you're into F&B, food and beverages space, right? Failure mode could be a customer is walking in and you run out of stock. What is the likelihood of that happening? And what is the impact? If it does happen, you're not able to cater to that customer. Or in our example, the seminar gets disrupted. So, and what is the severity of that impact? Now, once you map these two, essentially, I've not looking yet. So where it's a low impact, right? So essentially, you prioritize on the basis of the product, impact into the likelihood. If you're high on both ends, you need to fix that first, right? Otherwise, you have time to address it over the time period, right? So this is what we call as FMEA analysis, very simple analysis, no complicated tools needed. Just assess what are the things that can go wrong in a particular process, the likelihood of it, the impact of it, and then prioritize accordingly. So now that we've spoken about some of the tools to define processes, ensure that the processes are effective, let's move to the technology layer. So technology layer is where now you have the process, use tools that communicate with each other. If tools are not capable of communicating with each other, you build workflows in a manner where you're not creating data silos. Now, what are data silos? Like I've given an example at the beginning where at the end of the month, if a potential investor or a financier or anyone asks you, what is your sales number? Now, are you able to give it instantly, immediately? Or are there reconciliations that are required? The payment gateway gives a different number, but my accounting team, there is a different number. The reconciliation between payment gateway, accounting is not done, right? What are your payables at the end of the month? What are your receivables at the end of the month? Why do you have 2 numbers, 3 numbers floating around, right? So the easy way to fix it is have one unified platform or integrate the tools that you're using, right? For example, as soon as an opportunity is won from the sales side, right? You log that opportunity in the CRM. The same details flow into your AR sales ordering module. O2C is what we call it, which is order to cash. Right from the time there's an order coming in, all the way to you collect your cash. We call it O2C cycle, right? So from the time you won an opportunity, log into CRM, the same details are flowing into the sales order. So there's no second information coming in, secondary information coming in. The same information goes into sales order, work gets done or products get shipped, same goes into invoice, then money comes in, you have the information already logged, payment gets reconciled, and all the while, your dashboard was getting updated live. So the biggest advantage that you have when you have modules talking to each other, getting updated in real time is your decision making becomes faster and your decision making becomes better because you're basing your decision not what I feel or the gut feel, but on real data. So at each stage, you have visibility towards what are the deals, what are the sales, what is pending receivable, cash position, because I'm also tracking collections, etc. So this is that we set out with. What do I automate? Where do I bring in AI, etc. So high volume, low judgment tasks, right? You automate these, you're essentially freeing capacity. You're making people more productive without adding any further risk. So these could include your capturing invoices, expense categorization, reconciliation, etc. So those can be easily automated. Now, what is it that you need to protect, right? A, handoff decisions at process boundaries. Let's say, what do I mean by a process boundary? An internal stakeholder talking to an external person, right? Function to function boundaries. Those handoff decisions you need to protect, right? Then customer escalations that require empathy, that require judgment, right? Approval thresholds with real accountability. So these are certain things that we need to protect and not necessarily automate. We've also listed down some of the mistakes that we have seen happen. Typically, companies do these while they're trying to implement technology. A, you're building process reactively. It is important to always have that feedback loop open, take feedback, improve, but you must also be proactive in the way you define your process, in the way you build your system. Reactive will not yield results, especially when you're looking to scale down, because you can't always react. So some of the tools that we discussed, it could be DMAC or it could be FMEA. You're essentially proactively expecting the things that can go wrong, and you're being prepared for it. So don't always be reactive, build your processes proactively. Something that's worked for another organization, it is not necessary that it will work for me. That's one common mistake that we've seen. Understand what are your internal processes. Understand the leadership's working style. Is the leader comfortable working on a mobile phone before you pitch that idea because saying that it's worked for some other leader? Understand the company, its culture, and then implement tools. Technology before process. Again, I've said this earlier. Don't digitize chaos. First fix the chaos, then bring in technology. So first fix the process, then technology comes in. The fourth one is again something that we have seen very closely, where the real users, more often than not, do not have a say in the decision. That means to say, when you're implementing technology, it is not a good sign when the leadership decides and pushes it across organization. Have the real process owners, the task owners involved in this decision so that they are ready for it without any friction. Now, treating documentation as a one-time exercise, especially processes, these are not cast in stone where you define process and you're done for it. No, these need constant improvement, feedback mechanism. Tools like DMAC come into that. So these are some of the common mistakes that we've seen. Now, if you implement process the right way and then bring in technology, these are again live, real case studies from our work. We have seen a company which will take typically which would take 40-45 days. In fact, when we first started discussing with this company, I think it was in the month of May, and they were saying we are looking at closing our March books. The month of March is getting closed in the month of May, and I was like, maybe that's a mistake. Maybe they're referring to April books. No, but they would take 40-45 days to close each month in cycle. Reconciliation of payment gateway data, e-commerce, marketplace data, all of that tying up with your inventory fulfillment data, major reconciliations were involved, right? So they would take 40-45 days to close. But once you got the handoff process streamlined, once you have an integrated tool in place, now all they would need is 5 to 6 days of a month end for close. The same thing again on order fulfillment side also. The timelines have improved as well as accuracy has improved because now the handoffs are much more smooth. The system, when it moves from one function to another system, it is very clear with respect to what the other team is expected to do. So all of this has resulted in fact, one of the case study is a landmark M&A transaction where once you fix your processes, bring in new tools into place, a holistic framework. One of our clients where we work very closely, it has resulted in a landmark M&A acquisition. It's in fact one of the largest deals in the Indian M&A history. So that's one case study. Now, typically, where do I begin? If there are business owners here, CXOs here, if you want to take back and want to start implementing this in your organization, where do we start? First, map and diagnose. Now, what do we mean by diagnose? Understand where your existing processes are, the baseline currently, and then move to design and configure. Design and configure is where some of the tools that we have outlined earlier will come in handy. Then move to testing, training, and migration to a new system. Eventually, you can obviously look at stabilizing that. So, we'll be happy to take any questions from the room. So, this is a framework that's typically suggested by us. And any thoughts or any questions that you will have, happy to take that. Maybe I think you can also look at what are some of the common process problems that have affected you as business owners or CXOs. Maybe we'll be happy to take that as well. And we're also exhibiting today at booth 816. We'll be happy to have a one-on-one conversation as well to understand your experiences and to share more case studies from our side. Looking forward to seeing you there. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to take those.